Now we put the Holy Spirit back in our pocket because we need that to preach, I do believe. Today we are continuing our message on the subject of being humble. This is the fourth message in the series that I am preaching on what being a Christian is like. And I would have to say that being a humble person is probably the most... enough. It's probably enough of the major thing we need to be about in our Christian life, is to be humble. So today I want to share a few words with you about that. A story is told about two women that were shopping in a gift shop. And one of the women was buying gifts right and left and putting them in her package. And the other woman looked at her and said, "My goodness, why are you buying all these gifts? Who are they for?" She said, "They're for myself." The woman said, "Why are you buying gifts for yourself?" She said, "Well, you know, I've been going to the church's spiritual formation class on being humble. And I think now I'm as humble as anybody could ever be." The other woman said, "Seems like you're pretty proud of that." And the woman said, "You bet I am." Yeah, we often don't really know what humility is about. And we don't really know how to be humble. We don't understand what it is. A great Christian writer by the name of C.S. Lewis, when he was asked what is divine Christian humility, he said, "It is not thinking less of yourself, it is thinking of yourself less." Think about that, yes. True Christian humility is when we think about ourselves less and less and less, and others more and more and more. This is the model Jesus showed us. The model that shows us what it's like to think only of others and not of ourselves. And so Jesus taught these what we call Beatitudes. We heard them read this morning from the Gospel, Luke 6th chapter, verses 20 and 21 are the ones I wish to focus upon this morning. There's more here in this that I could preach upon in maybe 4 or 5 hours, and I'm sure you don't want to wait that long. So we're going to focus upon verses 20 and 21, because I believe these three verses really teach us how to find divine Christian humility. So let's look at each one. Let's pray upon it, meditate upon it, think upon it, speak upon it, and be made much more aware of how we can become humble. The first one simply says, "Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of heaven." What kind of poverty? What kind of poverty? That's the question. What kind of poverty? Does it mean to not have any money in your pocket? Is that what we're talking about here? I don't think it's talking about economically poor. Jesus said very plainly, we shall have the poor with us always. Economic poverty is a reality of our world. It's not going to go away. But there's another kind of poverty that Jesus was speaking about. And it's a poverty that leads us to true Christian humility. Let's think upon what that poverty might be. And let's think of how we might illustrate it. These days I'm remembering my life from a long time ago when I was a child. And I am remembering my father. Now my father was a Christian man. He was what they called a hard shell Baptist. Always wondered what that meant. That's what he called himself, hard shell Baptist. He was a quiet man. He never said much. We did go to church quite often. He never said anything in church. I don't think I ever heard him sing a hymn in church. He just went. It was his duty and obligation to go, and he went. But somehow it came to pass, I don't remember how it came to pass, but somehow the pastor of that church decided to ask my father to give a witness one morning. And the whole family, we were all kind of excited because we'd never heard my father speak in the church before. And he got up to speak, and I remember that message so well. I don't remember it word by word. That was 50 years ago. But I do remember the basic idea of what he said, and I'll share that with you now. He got up and told us about the fact that when he was a young man, back in about 1921, he had a horse. The horse was a Palomino, which is one of the most beautiful horses if you've ever seen one. They're golden chestnut brown with white manes. And he loved that horse. It was his favorite horse. This was before cars were really available to the general public, and you rode on horse all the time. He called his horse Old Paint. Old Paint. That's what he called him. And he told the story in that day in church about he loved to ride Old Paint out into the woods. Now this was back in 1921. And the border between Texas and Louisiana, which is where he lived nearby, it was kind of fungible. Who knew where that border really was? There was a river out there someplace. And my father liked to ride way out into the forest on Old Paint and cross over into Louisiana and ride a while and then cross back. He did that on Sundays. He loved to do it. But one day he got just kind of carried away, and he and Old Paint just kept going on and on and on. And when you get over into the Louisiana side, the river there kind of winds this way and winds that way, and there's a switchback over here and a switchback over there. And my father said he got lost. It was getting late, getting close to sundown, and he realized he didn't know whether to go forward or go backwards or which way to get back to Texas and to his father's ranch. And so he tried to go this way, and he tried to go that way, and every time he went a different direction, the forest got thicker and more dense, and it didn't look familiar to him at all, and he began to be really worried. How am I going to get home? It's going to be dark here soon. What am I going to do? And so he stopped for a while and thought about it, trying to remember which way was he supposed to go. When a thought occurred to him, he said, what if I just let the reins go and tell Old Paint to take me home? And he did that. And he kind of kicked Old Paint and said, home, boy! Old Paint wasn't impressed. He kept eating grass, kind of walking around. So about the second or third time, finally, my father said to him, home, boy, home! And it woke him up, and it was like he took off at a gallop and made a sharp left turn and almost threw my father off into the ditch. But my father said, I hung on for dear life, the saddle horn, because Old Paint had this purpose to get home, and he absolutely seemed to know where he was going. And they rode through the forest, and they rode through the swamps, and they rode through the clearings, just going on and on and on. And my father thought to himself, I sure hope Old Paint knows where he's going. And soon they came to a clearing, and my father could see. He could see that this was a clearing he was familiar with. He knew this place. And so he started to reach down to get the reins back to pull Old Paint in. And then he said, a thought came to him. He's got me this far. Why don't I just let him take me on home? And then, before he sat down, my father said, God's got me this far. Why don't I just let him take me on home? What we need is a poverty. We need a poverty of reins. We got too many reins in our life. We want to hold this back. We want to hold that back. We want to slap this and slap that. We want to control God. We want to control others. We want to control everybody in our world. We want to get ourselves home. That's what we want to do. And we think we can do it until we get lost and we can't find our way home. And the way to find your way home, the way to find yourself to be the truly divine, humble person that you were meant to be, is to let go of the reins and let God take you home. That's the gospel right there. That's the message of how we are meant to be. We are human, and we are meant to be humble. And we are to let God be the lead, not us be the lead. That is the point. We are to be poor in our own spirit. We are to be poor in our pride, poor in our envy, poor in our vanity, poor in our malice, poor in our bitterness, poor in our disappointments, and on and on and on and on. Pump that balloon and let God You got too much puffed upness. We all have too much puffed upness. Like Paul said, do not think more highly of yourself than you should. You don't control life, and you don't control others, and you don't control anything in this world. God does. So let God take you home. Be poor. Be poor. Matthew added it. He said, be poor in spirit, trying to make us understand more clearly what Jesus meant when he said, blessed are you who are poor. Poor, 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 poor. For yours is the kingdom of heaven. Second one that it says. The second one is even, I think, more powerful. This one is extremely powerful to me, and I hope I can get through this. Blessed are you who hunger, for you shall be satisfied. What kind of hunger? What kind of hunger are we talking about? Is it hunger for a barbecue sandwich? Is it hunger for something that we'd like to do? What kind of hunger is it? Well, Jesus says it's the only kind of hunger that can be satisfied. We got a lot of hungers in this world. We got a lot of hungers in our self. And we try to feed all those hungers, but not one of them can be satisfied. There's only one hunger that can be truly satisfied. I remember the first time I discovered what that hunger is. I remember the first time I was satisfied. I was a young pastor. I think I was about 27 years old back then. 26, 27. Youth minister, large church. And in our youth ministry, we had one of our chaperones, counselors, a woman that helped us. She was a makeup artist. And she did all kinds of makeup for television people and stuff like that. And she came to me one day with an idea. And she said, you know, I went down to visit the children in the cancer ward at Seton Hospital in Austin. She said, I went down there, and they're so sad, those poor kids, 10, 11, 9, 13, 14 years old, dying of cancer, painful, miserable life. And she said, how about I dress you up like a clown? Well, that's okay, I guess. And she said, we'll call you Kenny the Clown. Kenny the Clown. So she put the little ball cap on and painted my eyes, put the little red nose on. I remember that. Couldn't hardly breathe. And we started a ministry to the children in the cancer ward of Seton Hospital. And we would go down there in the afternoons, on Sunday afternoon, and take several of the youth with us. And we would play games with them. We would read to them. We would put on skits that were kind of funny, hitting each other with balloons and things like that, hitting them with balloons. And we try to make them laugh. We try to make them smile. We try to give them a pleasant Sunday afternoon. That was our ministry. And it touched all of us to do that. But the satisfaction came. I can remember it as if it were yesterday. It was about 45 years ago, I think. There was a young girl there. She was probably about 13 years old. Blonde hair, cute little blue eyes, and she was dying of leukemia. The nurses told us she didn't have much time to live. She was almost in a coma. And we went in there to try to cheer her up, but she wouldn't open her eyes very much. And her little hand was lying there on the bed. And so I went up there and I put her hand in my hand and I kind of petted it like that. And we read her a story, a Bible story, about Jesus in the boat and the disciples all scared. And he calmed the wind and he calmed the storm. And she seemed to listen to that story. And she just wouldn't open her eyes. I think she was almost in a coma, if not in a coma. I can see her face right now. And when we finished the story, I felt her little hand squeeze my hand. It's been 45 years and I can still feel that squeeze. Satisfaction. To know that you have just been used by God to love someone.
Amen.
That's the only satisfaction you'll ever find in this world. I disagree with the old Rolling Stones song that says, I can't get no satisfaction. Believe me, I tell you the truth, you can get satisfaction in this life. If you let yourself be used by love. This is how you get the satisfaction you need. So often we go after all the other hungers and we eat this and we eat that and we go here and we go there and we do this and we do that. And maybe it's a fine thing for a while. We say, oh, I had a great trip. Or, oh, I had a great restaurant last night. Or, oh, I had a great visit with my friends. Oh, I had a great time doing this and I had a great time doing that. But you know what happens when you wake up the next day? That satisfaction is gone. The satisfaction that will stay with you throughout all eternity is when you feel you have been used by love. And in order to feel that way, you've got to give up yourself. You've got to get rid of yourself. You've got to quit thinking about yourself. And you've got to go and let God use you to love. When you do that, all your self-pity goes away. All your confusion goes away. Your madness, your hurt, your envy, all that goes away because I tell you the truth. You know what it feels like to give love. And I can tell you for a fact in my life now, I will have to say, in some ways I wish I could go back to that day with that little girl and her hand squeezing me because that was one of the greatest moments of my life. But I have felt many other opportunities and glorious occasions of love in which I have been used. Not that I was loving, but that I was being used to love. I felt many. When we first came here to Cuenca almost 9 years ago, Rebecca and I volunteered at the Casa de Esperanza, not the Hogar de Esperanza, but the Casa de Esperanza. It was the first orphanage for abandoned children in Ecuador, only 9 years ago. These children were abandoned by their parents, generally up in the mountains, because the parents wanted to go to the United States and make money, and they just left their child on the street up there. So the government of Ecuador didn't know what to do with them, so they gathered them up and they put them in jail. Because they had no foster homes here in those days. They had no orphanage like that in those days. Not the government anyway. And so these children were in the jail next to the drunk tank, abandoned by their parents. What a great way to begin life. But this young woman from Peru, Paula was her name, I can't remember her last name, but she opened a house called Casa de Esperanza. And she took in as many of those children as she could, 42, 43, I don't know how many there were. Some of them were little cup-eared children, don't have any ear, they just got a little thing there. It's a very common trait here in Ecuador, that a child is born without an ear. And they were such a loving little group of kids. And my wife and I, we went down there and we volunteered, and we hugged them, and we played with them. Because the Ecuadorian people wouldn't do that, because they were condemned of God, they believed. Anybody who had a broken family is condemned of God. That's what they thought. So it was only us gringos that went there at first to hug them, to love them, to cherish them. And there again, I felt that same satisfaction. Oh, yes, I did. And it warmed my heart beyond belief. I remember when it came to pass that I would take over the position here of being the pastor and preaching. I felt badly about it, because I didn't want to give up the work I did in the trenches. It's so much more rewarding, I thought, to go out there and hug and help and give. Because when you become a pastor of a church, when you preach, well, you don't get a chance to do that because you're so busy getting all that organized, all that set up, all that done. And so I had a little argument with the Lord at first. I don't really want to do this, I thought. I'd rather go out and hug a child than preach the gospel. But you know what the Lord said to me? Preaching is a way to love too. And so I have found it to be true that every Sunday morning I get satisfaction because I'm able to show love to you through the gospel that is given to me. But the whole point of it all is just like Jesus said, blessed are those who hunger to love somebody, for they shall be satisfied. Amen to that. Then comes the last one. This is the most difficult one. It's hard to understand this one. The other two, pretty easy. Blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh. What kind of weeping are we talking about here? What are we weeping for? What is this sorrow all about? Is this just for people who've had a bad day and maybe they'll have a good day later on? Is this for people who've lost a loved one and they're weeping at the grave? What is this weeping? What is it? Well, whatever it is, it's something that can change. Because it says, you weep now, you will laugh. You see. It's something we can weep about that can change. So many things in this life we weep about cannot change. You lose a loved one to death, that's just the way it is. You get sick with some horrible disease, that's the way it is. You have financial ruin, well, that's the way it is. All these things can happen to us in life, and the hurt of these things and the disaster of these things does not change. You just endure and die. That's the human life. But there's one thing we can weep over that can change. There's one thing that we can feel very, very sorrowful about that can change to laughter. And that's the thing we need to think about. What could that be? What could that be? Well, driving in Ecuador makes me weep. I should say, makes me feel sorrowful. And it's not because of the way they drive here. You get used to that. No, it's not that. It's not that makes me sorrowful or makes me weep. What makes me sorrowful and what makes me weep when I drive here in Ecuador is the fact that I often get lost. I get turned around. Turned down a one-way street that's going the wrong way. Place is supposed to be here. I go there and I can't even find the street name on the side of the houses anywhere. Yeah, I know the address, but nobody put the street names out there. So what are we going to do? When I drive in Ecuador, I do feel sad. I feel sorrowful because it seems like I'm often getting lost. And I don't like being lost. I really don't. And oftentimes when we go out to go someplace that we've not been before, I've looked it up on the Cuenca City map like we have on the wall back there. I know I need to go this way and I need to go that way. And so I head out. And I always have confidence. Rebecca says, you know where you're going? I said, oh yeah. No doubt about it. But then we get out there and I get turned around and I can't tell if it's this way or that way and get kind of frustrated about it. And then inevitably, and I say inevitably, Rebecca says, why don't we stop and ask somebody? Oh, I hate that. Because, you know, I am the pastor. I should know everything, right? I am the driver. I should know everything, right? Who wants to stop and ask somebody? Not me. And then I go on to tell her, I said, you know, this is Ecuador. They never give you good directions anyway. And then I go on and say, you know, can't even understand what they say anyhow. So who wants to stop and get directions? And so I forge ahead, stubbornly forge ahead. I'm not lost, I just don't know where I am. So I forge ahead, and I forge ahead. And eventually comes the statement again. Why don't we just stop and ask somebody? But after about the third or fourth time, I begin to feel this kind of a sorrow, you might call it, kind of a weeping, you might call it, in which I have to admit, I'm lost. And then I always say it this way. I say, you know, I think I might stop and ask somebody. Oh, that drives Rebecca crazy. You know, I've been saying that for all afternoon. You see, the point of that little story is this. You got to feel sorrow for being lost before you can feel joy for being found. You see? What's the one thing we can weep over now, but we can laugh about later? It's being lost and being found. You see? That's the only thing that can change in this life. Nothing else going to change. But you can be found. You can be found by God. But in order to be found by God, you got to have the humility, you got to have the humbleness to admit that you are lost. That you don't know where you are, you don't know why you're here, you don't know where you're going, you don't know what you're supposed to be doing. You got to feel that sorrow. Then God can say, well, let me show you the way. Let me show you the way. Let me lead you to those places where you can be who you are supposed to be. Let me lead you to those places where you can do what you're supposed to do. This is what God does. He finds us and He uses us. But as long as we will not admit that we are lost, as long as we think we are in control and we know where we are and we're not going to ask nobody, God can't do much about that. God can't do anything about that, as a matter of fact. Well, so there it is. These are then the three things that we need to become. These are becomings. These are transformations. You need to understand that the gospel calls you to be transformed from the balloon-like creature you used to be to the humble creature you can be. This is what the gospel calls us to do, is to be these things. It doesn't call us to do these things. It calls us to be these things. When I was in graduate school, I was studying philosophy. I was going to become a doctor of philosophy, and I studied philosophy a lot. Until I decided to move on into the seminary to study theology. But for several years on the graduate level, I studied every philosopher there was, from the ancient to the modern. But there's one that I've always appreciated beyond all the other philosophers that I've ever studied, and he is the one who began it all, actually, in our Western world, so to speak. His name was Socrates. About 307 BC, he began to think about life. And he began to think about what was important. And he began to think about how do human beings change. Yeah, 306 BC is 300 years before Christ. He began to think about how do human beings change? What do they need to do? And he made a statement that I've always remembered, a beautiful summary of what we need to do if we are to become the divinely humble Christian people that we are supposed to be. He said the secret of real transformation is to focus all your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. This is what God calls us to do. He calls us to join Him in building us a new life. The old, forget about it. Nothing there to be thinking about. It's the new life that God wants to build in our life. And all we need to do is to help Him do what God wants to do. And that is to build that new life for us. Build a new life in which we are poor of all human things. Build a new life in which we hunger for only one thing, and that is to show love everywhere to anyone, any place we can. And finally, to build a new life that weeps and feels sorrow over how lost we are without the love and guidance of God. This is the new life. This is the new life God gives us, and it is the humble life of the Christian. For just as Jesus said, blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you who hunger, for you shall be satisfied. And blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh. Amen.